I'll bring people in as they come. I thought we get started now. Just checking again, everything okay with sound and everybody can see me and you can also see the screens. Also see the PowerPoint. If you could just someone come back and they'd be great.
Yeah, it's all fine.
All fine? Good. All right. Today is going to be an interesting one. We're just going to talk about leading yourselves. If you're leading others, everything starts with you and how to lead yourself. So I just picked out a few ideas from this aspect and want to take you through those and then also give you time to ask questions as we go too. Everything starts with you knowing you. And that's the first really one here is that the more you understand yourself, you think about this, the deeper you understand yourself, the more you can adapt your behavior to others. So if you don't understand yourself, you don't know how you need to adapt your behavior to others, and it just doesn't work out very well. And so, the more you invest in you knowing you, the better you're going to be and be able to influence others. And the other thing is, what's very interesting about you knowing you is to know that you can know yourself so you know when to control your behavior. A lot of people talking about the hot buttons and what drives you and so forth. But if you are, if you think about this and come back via the chat function when you can answer this, but let me ask you a quick question. If you had reported to a leader who was up and down emotionally all the time, so that you never know how they're feeling or anything, you're always going to the secretary, how's the boss today? Or they're changing their priorities all the time. What are you thinking about a boss who's always up and down or changing their priorities? You come back via the chat function. It's like hell, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I've had people like that in the past, and once you get the hang of it, you don't necessarily do what they're going to say because you think it's going to change. So
exactly.
you do what you decide is the right thing to do.
Great comment. It's exactly it. You're not really following them as closely. When you're not consistent, it raises a question mark in other people. People with a question mark do whatever they want, or they don't do anything. It freezes. So you have to be consistent in your behaviors if you really want to be able to influence others and you get them to following you. It's so important. But think about, how do you get to know you? What is it that you do to get to know yourself? For sure, you need feedback. Now, some people don't like feedback, right? Because they just don't like to hear the negative. But look at it another way, in a positive way. You can't fix what you don't know. So, you can't fix what you don't know. So if you're not constantly getting feedback from people, you're not improving. In fact, they always say, what, I forget how many years ago it was, but they sent a missile out of a submarine and shot down a satellite that was coming down. And if you think about a missile, it's never going exactly at its target. It's constantly adjusting. So it to shoot it off, and then it's constantly adjusting until it gets there. And that's how like entrepreneurs are and everything. But you can't get feedback if you're not taking action, right? So if you're not taking action, you're not going to get feedback. So it's so important to get feedback from everybody. If you ask feedback for your people, they don't necessarily tell you the truth all the time. So you need 360 feedback and get feedback from wherever you can. And here's another one. To be honest, every feedback is good, because even in the most destructive feedback, there's always something that maybe we could have done that triggered that type of behavior in others and so forth. So, accept everything. I'm very lucky as a speaker and an educator and things. I get evaluated everywhere I go. So that feedback has been tremendously helpful to me. And I do things totally different than I did 15 years ago when I started. Okay. So keep in mind that, ask for feedback. But if you get feedback, you got to do one other thing too. You need to reflect, because you don't reflect on the feedback you get, you don't take enough action. All right. and you don't know where you're going to take action. So a great definition of reflection is the opportunity to give yourself advice. So, the more you're reflecting, or if you're reflecting at the right time, you begin to use more of what you learn. Okay. And basically, everybody is successful at least does a weekly reflection. There's a couple people who go away every 6 months and reflect and plan out the future for a day or so by themselves and so forth. So, it's reflecting which brings everything back together again, and we start to see our priorities in better ways too. So those are really good twins of getting to know yourself, reflecting more, and asking for feedback. And the more you do those two things, the faster you're going to grow. But there's one other thing that's really important, and that's differences. If you're around people who are exactly like you, you're not learning. It's when you're around people that are different than you or think different than you that they start to say something and say, well, if they think that way, why do I think this way? Now, I'll tell you a funny story. In one of the countries I lived in, one of the managers came in on after the weekend, and he asked me a question. He was watching American TV on the weekend, and he asked me a question. Can you explain this American expression to me? Okay. And what's interesting, the American expression was, hold on a second, the American expression was, the shit is going to hit the fan. Now, as an American, I never visualized that. Okay. I never visualized, shit hitting the fan. Okay. And so, I just knew as a kid, this was bad. And that's all the amount of that I thought about it. Okay. So keep in mind this, you know things, or you haven't thought about why but you learn from your parents, you learn from others. And it's only when you meet people different than you, who are thinking different than you, is that you start to, wonder, well, why do I think this way? And you begin to think in depth. So, during the week, when you're trying to grow, you want to meet people different than you. On the weekend, if you want to relax, you want people who are more like you that way. So keep in mind this, is that, don't be afraid of people that are different than you, because they will always help you grow faster. I was lucky. I lived in 6 countries besides, my own country, the US, and I've always traveled a lot. I've met all different people than me, and it's certainly changed. And think about it, if you never change your mind, are you actually growing? Right? So if you never change your mind, are you actually learning new things and growing? Because, my impression and my view of leadership has changed from the time I started. Right? And so the more you know you, the more aware you are, the more consistent you can be in your behaviors, and the more that you can use you can adapt and understand yourself in order to have greater influence with others. But it all starts with you understanding you. Okay. So let me ask you a question. Come back via the chat function. How many of you reflect? And when do you reflect? When do you do a reflection? Do you do it weekly, daily, as needed? Come back via the chat function. Let me know, how often do you guys reflect? So one comes daily. How about the rest of you? During your vacation, meditation? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, while you're running. Running exercise is a good one to reflect on those things. But, think about it. Reflection is a way for you to pull everything back together, and also to help you focus much stronger as well. So we'll talk about focus later, but keep that in mind. Okay. Now, here's a quick question. Come back by the chat. On a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you think you know you? On a scale 1 to 10, how good do you think you know you? Yeah, I see a lot of 7s, a couple 9s. Yeah. 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 Do you think do you, do you think you're always going to have to invest in you knowing you? or you can just say, hey, I know myself enough now, and I'm done, you know. So, you know, nobody's a 10 because we're all a learning in progress. So, you know, the constant, you know, like if at the beginning, you know yourself in black and white, the more you learn from others and everything, you start to learn yourself in colors. And it's when you learn the colors that you have the most impact on others, because now you can start to make the more subtle adapting subtly, which has a huge, huge impact. It's the same as, you know, working with sort of between Americans and Brits. Sometimes it's a very, very subtle difference, which is the difference between the two. Okay. So have I sold you guys on you investing more time and you understanding you? Okay. Give me a thumbs up or a yes or a Y or whatever in the chat function. Have I sold you on investing a little bit more time on that? Okay. And don't try to go away and just sort of dream and reflect only by yourself without any feedback, because you're reflecting with no information. So constantly get feedback, reflect, and embrace yourself with different people. Finish this off with one comment. I heard a consultant say this one time. He said, my goal in life is to constantly meet people who disturb my view of the world. Because if you constantly meet people who disturb your view, it's going to force you to think and think why you think this way. The deeper you understand something, and you know by thinking it through, the more you can adapt and influence others. Okay, now the second thing is you got to understand your strengths and your weaknesses. Okay, so if I ask you this question, come back through the chat, which is more important to work on? On a priority, which is more important to work on, your strengths or your weaknesses? What do you think? We have one strengths. Depends on the weakness. Yeah. So the majority of strengths, both. Yeah. The thing is there was a study many years ago by Marcus Buckingham, and they interviewed and studied leaders. The most successful leaders spend more time on their strengths than their weaknesses, because your strengths drive your success, your weaknesses only slow it. So if you're only working on the things that prevent it from going fast, you're slowing yourself down. Your uniqueness, your competitive advantage is within your strengths. So the more you grow your strengths, the more successful you're going to be. But you now have two types of weaknesses. You have weaknesses that slow your strengths, and you have weaknesses that have no connection to your strengths. So here's a quick question. Come back by the chat. What should you do with weaknesses that have no connection to your strength? If they have no connection to your strength, what should you do with those? Should you ignore them? What should you do? You don't care? You ignore them? Yeah. Here's what you do. You ignore them from your own development, but you hire people who have strengths and those weaknesses. So you surround yourself with people who have strengths and those weaknesses. You learn by just working with them, but they're not helping you. They're helping you be more successful, but not in something that you need to work with. So, you know, I can tell a poor leader by looking at his leadership team, because if they're exactly like him or her, you know, they've magnified all the strengths, but they've also magnified all the weaknesses. Okay. So the two weaknesses, or basically the weaknesses that slow your strengths, are all to do with your influencing skills. Because you're great at something, but if people don't want to work with you, or they don't want to take your influence, you haven't magnified the strength. It's kind of like addition strength. So you want to think about your influencing skills as the number one thing to always grow, because your influencing skills is the magnifier of your strength. Two skills that are two weaknesses that every successful CEO has is they don't listen, right? Because they have the answer. They want the conversation as short as possible, or they give too many answers. In other words, they give the answer and they save their people from thinking and growing. So, but the biggest thing I found is in the listening skills, because when you listen first, you know how to adapt your message to get through to the other person better. So one thing I wish I would have learned, I didn't learn this until mid-career, to work on my influencing skills. And now's the best time in ever to work on influencing skills, because the books out there on influence and all these other things are just amazing. Okay. And I think in one of the sessions, I sent out a A5 cheat sheet of influencing factors, and I'll include it in this one as well, so you have it. So, keep this in mind. Continue growing your strengths, okay? Because your strengths drive your success. They make you unique, and you'll be even stronger. For every weakness that are not connected to your strengths, hire people around you, bring people into the team around you, do whatever you can. And for the weakness that's to slow you, think about it. It's mostly those influencing skills, because, basically success is a team sport. And so, the more that you have people around you helping you, the more they're willing to listen, the more power you have. Okay. So those are the two main things, the key things I wanted to cover up front. You understanding you, so you're consistent in your behavior, but you also understanding your strengths and weaknesses, so you know what to work on and who to surround yourself with. Okay, before we go forward, any questions on those things? Any questions on those two ideas? You can send them through the chat, or you can unmute and shout it out, whatever you like to do. So no questions. Boy, it must have been really clear. That's good. That's good. So understand you, focus on your strengths, surround yourself with other people, improve your influencing skills. Now, a couple other just key things is, if you're a leader, you need to know your leadership sweet spot, and you need to be able to focus yourself in that sweet spot. That sweet spot is the intersection of your passion, your strengths, and the value, the impact you make. So think about this. It's what you love doing, it's what you're really good at, and where you add the most value. The biggest problem I see in leaders is this, they're doing things they like to do. It's the intersection of your passion and your strengths. But your people could do it, and you're not delegating it because you like to do it. I used to work with lawyers a lot, and one lawyer said to me, I never delegate mergers and acquisitions work. It's the only thing I like about my job. But think about this. If you're doing what you like to do, you are probably in your comfort zone. And if you're in your comfort zone, you're not growing, right? And so you have to let go of those things. And if you're doing what you like doing and your people could do it, you're actually competing with your people. Okay? You're competing with your people. If you compete with your people, you're preventing them from growing, and you're not growing because you're in your comfort zone. So, it's very interesting, but think of it this way. Each year, you should be letting go of something you like to do. Okay? So that you can keep growing. You're delegating so your people can keep growing, and you're proving to others that you're ready for even more in that way. So your sweet spot is the intersection of where you make the biggest impact. Now, a quick question for you guys. Let me ask you this question. If you had to make a list of all the things you could never, ever delegate, right? These are things that only you could do as a leader. Would it be a long list, or would it be a short list? What do you think? Would it be a long list or short list? You could never delegate it. Be very, very short, right? So, think about it. There's tons of things that you can delegate. The biggest problem you don't delegate is two reasons. One, we just covered. You like doing it too much, so you don't let it go. The other reason is you need to feel in control. So if you have to be involved in everything to feel in control, you will be involved in everything and tell people. So one thing of maturity is being able to feel in control with less information, right? So you're trusting people. So if you always want to have more and more information and you need it to feel in control, then you're going to ask about everything and all these things there. So just try to reflect on yourself and think, what do you need to feel in control? Because if you can manage people in a way that you're gaining your control through people and not through information, you're able to do a lot more, and you're able to work on more alignment and relationship than being buried in your organization. Okay. So keep in mind, a great reflection for you guys to think about is, what's your sweet spot? And are you holding, ask yourself this question, are you holding on to things you like to do that could be both slowing you and slowing down your team? Okay. So keep that in mind. Okay. Have I sold you on this idea of a leadership sweet spot? Give me a thumbs up or a yes or so forth. Sold you an idea of a leadership sweet spot. Yeah. I didn't realize this one. I didn't realize this one until after I left leadership. And I learned this as part of studying leadership and putting together 3 or 4 different learnings from 3 or 4 different people to develop this. And then I just see it every time in leaders, where I see them holding on to things they like to do, because it's very, very easy to delegate what you don't like to do. But it's not so easy to delegate what you like to do to escape your comfort zone. Now, the other thing you want to think about here is you have to stay focused, right? And, you have to keep yourself focused on the right stuff. And, think about this. Everybody can choose between good and bad, but not everybody can choose between great and good. And if you think about it, if I ask you this question, come back via the chat, can everybody, let me ask you this question. Can everybody choose between the great and the good without any criteria? What do you think? Can you choose between great and good without any criteria? No. So, if you think about it, if you're just trying to just pick things, you tend to pick the easiest to do. You don't pick the hardest. And, the great and the good, the combination of those, and what is great, is what's going to create your future faster, right? It's what's going to create your future faster. So it's not, it's always a balance. In the best leaders, they think in an and. I have to deliver today, and I have to create the future. It's not, I'm going to spend 2 weeks delivering and just forget about the future. They always have both in mind, because they want to choose the great out of all the goods. Okay. So it's so important to think about these things. It's where you're going. And if you think about it, the future is not just, say, results. The future is the culture you're creating as well. So, because sometimes you need to build a stronger culture to create a greater foundation to create even better results. But there's a very interesting thing about focus that I learned one time. And I heard this story from a preacher. Preacher said this. He said, there was a sculpture bringing a big block of marble into the studio. And the sculptor's assistant. And the assistant says to the sculptor, what are you going to make out of this? Because it looks dirty, disfigured. I can't see anything really good. And so the sculptor looks at it from every angle and says, I see a magnificent stallion, a horse, flowing mane, flared nostrils, very muscular horse. But the sculptor's assistant says, but how are you going to make the horse out of this? He says, I'm going to take my chisel and I'm going to take my hammer and I'm going to chip away and chip away and chip away everything that's not a horse. And what's left over will be a masterpiece. So think about it. never enough time to do all the good. You have to chip away some of the good in order to focus more on the great. And this is what I found with very good people, very good successful people and leaders. They have the ability to say no. Particularly, they have the ability to say no to some good. And sometimes your people will think, no, that you should be doing certain things, but you have to say no to the good in order to put more time on the great. Okay? So keep that in mind. Stay focused. Focus on as much as you can. Remind yourself of your focus. Okay? Let me ask you a quick question. Where is your focus? Is it in your conscious mind or your subconscious mind? Where's your focus really reside? Is it the conscious or the subconscious mind? One says subconscious here. Yeah, it's in your subconscious mind. So you need a way to remind yourself. Put it in front of you every day. Make a picture out of it. A lot of times people say have a vision board. You have to figure out what works for you. But the more you remind yourself, repetition, the more that focus is stronger in your head. When I need to focus on something, I make it a wallpaper on my phone because I'm looking at my phone many times a day, and it reminds me of those things. Okay? So here's a tip for you guys on almost anything. Understand what's the best way to remind you. Because if you remind yourself in the way that works best for you, you'll keep everything a much stronger focus. And don't copy other people's. Yeah, you can get insights from people, but everybody I found likes to be reminded in a different way. So reflect some time and say, what is the best way to remind you so to do the right things and to stay focused? Okay. Now, next one is really, really important. Let me ask you a quick question coming back through the chat. Do you enjoy 100% of what you have to do to be successful in your job? Do you enjoy 100% of your do? No. None of us do. So results is basically what we enjoy plus what we don't enjoy. And if you're really going to be successful, you have to be able to do the non-enjoyable without being told. Because if you can't do the non-enjoyable without being told, you're going to need a boss to tell you. And you can't be your own boss. They say that we climb as high as we want in any company, depending on two things. Can we define our own work, which means can we stay focused? And two, can we motivate ourselves to do the work? That means motivate ourselves not just to do the enjoyable, but the non-enjoyable too. So that's absolutely critical, okay? And the thing is, if you have people in your team who don't like to do the non-enjoyable, you have to be around all the time to tell them to do it. And that is the thing. So personal responsibility is huge, okay? So, the more you do the non-enjoyable, it's part discipline, and sometimes it's part game. And sometimes it's a way to keep encouraging you. Let me ask a quick question. Everybody know Seinfeld from the TV show Seinfeld, which was on, I think, many, many years, right? Okay, you all know him, right? He had to write comedy for his TV shows. And, every day he didn't necessarily feel motivated to write. So what he did is he put a big calendar, a daily calendar with blocks for each day for the year on his wall in his study. And every day he wrote, he put a red X. And so his goal was to never break the chain of the red X. So there's never a day that he skips and he didn't at least write a little bit of comedy. So he had that on his wall, and he would never wanted to see a day where he did not make a red X. So in this case, non-enjoyables is part discipline, but it's part creating a game to make you do it. You know, for the guys, a great game is that tell your partner at home, if you don't do it this week, or you don't commit and do what you say, she gets a new dress. Or for the gals, the guy gets you know, season tickets to football or something. But you know, make it part discipline, but part game, that you do the non-enjoyable. Now, the quick question: what happens if you as a leader avoid the non-enjoyable? What does it allow your people to do if you avoid the non-enjoyable as a leader? What does it allow your people to do? What do you think? If you avoid it, what will your people do? Yeah, they'll do the same. They'll do the same. So, you know, the biggest thing you want to do is, there was a Brian Tracy wrote the book called Eat the Frog. Do the non-enjoyable first. But here's a thing for you I found. The most damaging non-enjoyable you have is, as a leader, you avoid difficult conversations. Because if you avoid a difficult conversation, there's usually some type of decision or something around that that's slowing the team down. And let me ask you a question. If you avoid a difficult conversation, and your people see you constantly avoiding difficult conversations, what are they thinking about you as a leader? Are they thinking of you as a strong leader or a weak leader? Yeah, it's weak, right? You know, the way to really prove that you're weak is to avoid difficult conversations. If you're in a big company, this has a bigger impact, because often, like when you're doing these things, you know, in big companies, you're always considering pay and bonuses based on a management team, and you're arguing for your people. If your people think you can't influence your peers and you're all avoiding difficult conversations, they're thinking you're not representing them in the salary or the bonus discussions. Now they're not only not following you or think you're weak, they're also thinking that, you know, I'm getting hurt financially because you're not representing me well. Okay. So as you climb, you have to grow your ability to handle difficult conversations. And that's a non-enjoyable you can't afford to avoid. Okay. So keep in mind this. And also in hiring people, hire people who will do the non-enjoyable without being told. Because if not, you're always going to have to be around them that way. Okay. Now, last two things, and then we'll open up for more questions. You got to create a habit, right? The habits are in your subconscious mind. So if you don't create a habit, you basically have to force yourself to do it for a lifetime. But if you create a habit, you just discipline yourself for 30 to 60 days to create it. And so habits get created based on two things. They get created based on repetition, and they get created based on emotion. In other words, the more you know why you need this habit, the emotion behind it, it builds the pathways in your brain faster with repetition. So if you're just doing it, you know, it takes a lot more repetition if there's no emotion behind it. I'll give you just a quick example of me. You know, 15 years ago when I started my own business, I decided to write a daily thought. And I wrote over 18,000 during the years, and I pick out the best and I shared them on social media. So I decided to read or study at least an hour a day. And so I was traveling a lot, so I'd read on a phone or I'd read a book. And so for 60 days, every time I was by myself outside the home, I forced myself to study something. And I would study for 60 minutes or so, and on a plane or a train or whatever, or listening to an audiobook, and then I put it away. But then I would constantly do that. So I got into a habit when I'm by myself somewhere outside the home, I will pick up a book to read or I'll do something because it's just natural now. And that's a tremendous thing. And so, you know, I don't have to force myself to study this way because it automatically happens. The only problem I have is in the lockdown, because if you're not leaving home, I can't do my habit. So I had to start to create a different habit for being under lockdown. So think about this. Whenever you realize you need a habit, ask yourself this question: would I rather be disciplined for a lifetime, or would I rather force myself to do this for the next 30 or 60 days? Okay. So then do it, repetition, and build the why behind it, because the emotion creates the pathway stronger. Think about this. You can never undo a habit. You can only create a new one, because your old habits are pathways in your brain which are very strong. The way to create a new habit is to create new pathways that are stronger than the old. So there's no way of saying to yourself to not do something. You have to create something in an action where you make those pathways larger. Okay. Now, the last thing is you have to find ways to handle stress, and you have to be your best. Okay. So think about this. As your stress builds, you have to put things in your life which bring the stress down. So here's a glass of water, and here's zero stress. You're sitting on a beach behind me, just relaxing. And here you're up at the top of the stress. One small drop, one small thing someone does sends you crazy. Where are successful leaders' stress levels? Where do you think? Is it the middle, halfway, 3/4? Come back via the chat. Where do you think successful leader stress levels are? Any ideas? Somebody half, 3/4? Yeah, it's about 3/4. There's two reasons. One, if you're successful, you put stress on yourself to improve, to go faster, to be better. Second thing is stress the people around you. If I ask you, where do most of your headaches come from? It's from people issues. So your stress is always climbing, but you're never at the top. You always have this gap, because if you work on the recovery things, you never reach the top, and you never blow up. Because sometimes you would blow up and it takes you months to get that relationship back because you say the wrong thing at the wrong time. So you basically, as your stress builds each day, you put things into your work week that bring the stress down. Like, you do exercise, or you read a book, or you meditate, and so forth. So the more you do that, the more you have a gap, and you're basically protecting yourself from you because you have space where small things will not send you ballistic, So, keep in mind that I call those things often the best recovery or mind vacations. Okay. So think about this. For the guys in the class today on Zoom, when you play football, are you thinking? What do you say? Are you thinking when you play football? Come back. Yeah. No, right? You're not thinking, because you're just doing it naturally. You play tennis, everybody. When you meditate, the purpose is not to think. So the best way to have recovery is to do mind vacations. Mind vacations could be exercise. Mind vacations could be playing with the kids on something you really love playing with. But the more your stress builds, the more you have to do the week. So here's what I found. The most successful people schedule their recovery. They protect it. They don't go, I'm so busy these 2 weeks, and they do nothing. Because if you're busy and do nothing, it climbs and climbs and climbs, and you go out of control at the worst moment. So, an interesting thing for me. Let's say that I have a very difficult day. And in the past, let's say I had some tough coaching sessions and everything. I need recovery that night. I need to clear my mind, because the next morning, if I bring that into the next morning, it's not going to be good. So, you kind of know. I'll bet you each of you could look in your calendar And you know, just by the people you're going to be working with that day, if you're going to be stressed or not at the end of the day. So consider this, you always need recovery before a difficult day, and you always need recovery after a difficult one in particular. So sometimes you should look at your calendar and put in some small things as you do it. I had one client who always got upset, and he used to go and walk around the block. He used to go out of the office, walk around the block, and come back in because he needed that little space so the next person he talks to, he just doesn't go crazy. Yeah. So those are some things about leading yourself. So come back for the chat function. What's the number one thing you take away from today? So in terms of what you could use, what's the number one takeaway that you have from today? One's reflection. How about the rest of you? Schedule the recovery, protect it. Yeah. Recovery time, feedback, good. So I'll open it up for, embrace people to think differently, grateful and the good. Great, everybody's taking different things away, which is good. So I'll open it up for questions, and also if you want to come on face to face and ask the question. So anything I can answer from what we covered today. I've got pretty much the screens open. Can I answer anything? And you can come online and just say it. Any questions, comments? None? Everybody's so bashful today, huh?
So Mark, I can make one question.
Sure,
right?
Paula.
Thank you. Thank you for always inspiring us. I'd like to ask you a little bit to elaborate a little bit more on the different side of the thing, because on terms of making or searching for the differences, it's very difficult to manage in a daily basis or to be successful with all the things that we hear. And normally we tend to recruit people that are very similar to us. It's normal. When we do an interview, we just look at the person and say, you don't belong to my tribe, or you belong to my tribe. Yep. So this is very difficult in a daily basis to deal with very different people, but that's where innovation comes from, or creativity, right? That's where breakthrough ideas come. So how this is a kind of a paradoxical thing, a paradoxical way of being, because we need to be surrounded by different people, but sometimes they're so different from us. They create a very dysfunctional organization. How can we avoid that?
Yeah, I think the first thing that helped me tremendously is also I like to attend interviews of people that are different than me. Listen to artists, listen to people that are in different jobs than you. They will have a totally different mindset and things like this. If I'd ask everybody on the call, do you like people reporting to you that will argue with you? What do you think? Do you like people that will argue with you? Yeah, some say it depends. Yeah, but the thing is that you want people that challenge each other. And if you think about it this way, would you go to a movie that had no conflict? A typical movie is feel good, there's a conflict, there's a resolved conflict, and there's the big win at the end. You would never go to a movie if there was zero conflict. Okay? So it's kind of like being able to work with different people and to organize a discussion so it doesn't get personal. That's key. And to not take it personally. So the more you know yourself, the more you won't take something personally, because we all have hot buttons. Someone says something and we'll really won't like it. So we're up on the time, but I'll stay on for answering any other questions as we go. So